Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm the young old man, and we're going to talk about speculative fiction today. One of my favorite subjects. Now, what is speculative fiction? Well, that's the genre of literature or films that deal with all things speculative, which is all of them actually. Haha. But mostly what it is sci-fi, science fiction, and fantasy. So, what's science fiction? Star Wars. Actually, it's more science. Star Wars is more science fantasy, but most people think of Star Wars as science fiction. Star Trek, science fiction. Buck Rogers in the 25th century. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Buck Rogers, science fiction. Knight Rider, to a degree, was science fiction. It was contemporary science fiction, but yeah, talking car, AI. We're getting closer to that, but we ain't there yet. So yeah, Knight Rider was science fiction, and the fantasy part, that's Lord of the Rings, Conan, Barbarian, you know. So sci-fi, obviously in the title, science fiction. So things that deal with science, more science-based, and fantasy is usually more magically based, and things that don't have a basis in scientific reality, and you can have a blending of the two. So, and then you have subgenres of each. So, you have space opera, and you have contemporary science fiction stuff that happens like now, and you know and in fantasy you have the magic and the horror is a subgenre of fantasy, stuff like that, vampires, werewolves, fantasy, and science fiction, spaceships and space exploration, and apocalyptic, fiction, and super technical worlds. Terminator. AI's taking over science fiction. So, and like most people, contemporary world that we live in today, a lot of people's first big introduction to science fiction was either Star Trek, which was, it was important and huge for the time, but the really big one was, of course, Star Wars. And we see the phenomenon that's become, right? But science fiction existed long before Star Trek and Star Wars, and, especially in literature, you know. But, so that was like my big introduction to science fiction. Where I first fell in love with it was Star Trek, Star Wars, and Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers was my shit. I love Buck Rogers. And Buck Rogers was innovative for its time. It took a page from, of course, Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, where a lot of the main characters, clearly were going to be white, but they had a lot of the secondary background characters, recurring characters, were black. I think they even had some Asians. It was a lot of. It wasn't all white, which was really cool. And as a kid, watching that, it was great. And one of the biggest celebrity recurring roles they had was Gary Coleman at the time. And if you don't know who that is, go do some research. But Different Strokes. What you talking about, Willis? Gary Coleman. He was really big at the time. So for him to show up recurring on Buck Rogers was, as a kid, like 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, that was great. Anyway, but literature wise, my first introduction to science fiction was was by an author who to this day is still my favorite author, Alan Dean Foster. That was Glory Lane. I love this book. This is my second copy because I have my original copy that my mother bought me when I was like 10, 11. And I have the cover. It's just, I read it so much that, the cover came off. This came out in 86, is it? Copyright, first printing. 87, excuse me. Yeah, 87. So, the year, August 87, year I turned 11. So, yeah, when I was 11, my mother bought me this book. I've been following Alan Dean Foster ever since. I have almost every single one of his books. Ever since like the late 70s, going through the 80s, all the way to the 90s, he became the go-to guy to novelize sci-fi films. Novelize meaning most films written from scripts go straight to the movies, and there's no book. A lot of sci-fi films, some do come from books first. Some were just written for the screen, and then they get hopefully a good writer to write the book version of the film. Alan was one of the main go-to guys for sci-fi films being novelized. And I think one of the reasons why he was because he novelized one of the most famous science fiction movies of all time, A New Hope, the first Star Wars, Episode 4. Now, he ghost wrote it. George Lucas's name was on it. But many, many years later, as an adult doing research, because the internet was a thing now, and I found out about, Alan ghostwriting A New Hope for George Lucas. It was like, he's got friends big places. And it's like, oh, okay, so, he did the novelization for the Alien films. I think all of them, actually. So he knows James Cameron. So yeah, Alan is that dude. But this book, first of all, look at how gorgeous that cover is. They don't make covers like this anymore. This is a wraparound cover, alright? This, to date, is still my favorite book cover of all time and favorite science fiction novel. It reminds me of, like, I grew up in New York, so, Grand Central Station, Port Authority, JFK, big, areas, a lot of million people in New York, right? So they landed a spaceship, see these three humans with their alien friend getting off into this, like, looks like a spaceport, with nothing but aliens, the coolest aliens ever. I love this cover. I love this book. I'll go over the main details of the book, but I haven't read this in a while. I used to read it like once every year when I was younger. It's been a few years since I read it again. I want to read it again now as the adult that I am. See what I probably maybe missed, if I missed anything. Because I've read that well over 5 times at least. Probably over 10 times at least. So, but I want to read it again now because I haven't read it in over 10 years. But yeah, it's 3 humans come in contact with this alien hiding out on Earth, and they get caught up in him. He's on the run from alien people trying to kill him and take what he has, and they go on an adventure through the universe, and it's really cool. As a young kid reading it, I completely was on a journey with him. I've never forgotten that story, and it's still my favorite. And Alan is my favorite author, and my equally favorite author, not my second favorite, my equally favorite author is Stephen Barnes. Now, first of all, look at that cover again. This is probably my second favorite cover of a book. Because, well, this is the first time I saw someone that looked like me on the cover of a book of science fiction. So I was immediately hooked. And the story, of course, on the blurb on the back was very intriguing. And that came out in '91. That wasn't the first printing, and I'm so glad it wasn't because, like, many years later, I was a kid when that came out. That was '91, so I was, yeah, teenager, young teenager, right? So I didn't know anything about the publishing. I didn't know that hardcovers came out first, and then after the hardcover run, then the soft covers came out, and then after a book's been out for a while, depending on how popular it was or what the author does, they can get it reprinted. I didn't know that was a reprint. The original cover, the first edition of that, I could have gotten a copy of it a long time. I think I've seen it. I didn't care about getting a copy of the first edition because the first edition didn't have someone who looked like me on it, which was a sick thing that publishing industry did and still kind of does. Not as blatantly as they did back then, but they still kind of whitewash things. Uh, just like movies. But anyway, but yeah. Also, one of my favorite characters ever, Aubrey Knight. Yeah, yeah. One of my subconscious drivers to becoming a filmmaker, because I'm a filmmaker now, was I wanted to see this on the big screen. I still do. I started working on a script actually before I even went to film school. I remember thinking I want to see this on film. I started working on a script for that. I had an idea about how to do it. I was like, oh, I could do this. So I'm gonna pull that out and I'm gonna finish it because I want to do it. I don't know if not Alan, excuse me, if Steven has that, someone has optioned that to be filmed, or if that's a project that Steven's working on in the background, because him and his wonderful wife Tanana Rivdu is also another excellent writer that I love. Um, uh, they're also getting into film work, and they've written scripts. And, Steven is an excellent script writer. He's award-winning script writer. He's written for Baywatch. What was it, Outer Limits? I think he won an award for Outer Limits uh, episode that he did. So yeah, and Steven is also a martial artist. Another reason why I love him, because I'm a martial artist, and yeah, and that's the other thing I like about Alan as well. Alan has traveled the world, right? Both of them are excellent world builders as far as their stories, and I think one of the reasons why Alan is such an excellent world builder is because he's traveled this world and he's come into contact with all sorts of cultures and peoples around the world. And what I like about Alan, like in the late '90s, early 2000s, as social media and the internet was becoming a thing, um, Alan had his own webpage created that he used to put his own blog post on, and so he would talk about his journeys and stuff, and it was like, oh wow, and reading the way he talks about his encounters and his travels, as you can see that in the way he writes in stories. Excellent world builder. If there was, and people ask people who read sci-fi, it's like, what would be your favorite world from movies or film, from movies or books? What universe would you actually like to exist in? I would like to exist in the Commonwealth. That hands down easy. Like, I want to exist in I don't need Star Trek. I don't even want Star Wars. I want the Commonwealth. Commonwealth is awesome. um, just great world building. And the Commonwealth, the main characters in the Commonwealth series, he's got an entire series of the Commonwealth, and he's got a series for two main characters and what their journey is, and then he has separate books in the entire taking place throughout the Commonwealth outside of those two main characters. Two main characters, Pip and Flinks, and then just great stories. Commonwealth is one of the most fleshed out, coolest literary. Is this thing? Is it? Is this not recording anymore? Okay. I think my thing is just not connecting right. Anyway, what was I saying? Mm. The Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is one of the coolest, expansive, exhilarating places I've ever had the pleasure to visit as far as literary is concerned. I would like to see that on the big screen too, but probably animated. I think a lot of Alan's works will work well in animation. That would be so cool. Um, Only drawback for the Commonwealth I have is the Thranks. They're cool to read about. I don't know if I could meet them in person though. I think I have enough control of self to be able to overcome my my phobia of insects. But man, but I still choose the Commonwealth. I get over myself. But yeah, yeah, excellent world builder, Alan Denny's, and well traveled, and you know when he travels, he's he's an eternal student, and he does not have any arrogance. You know, he's very respectful of the cultures and the peoples, not just human peoples that he comes in contact with. And yeah, it's one of the coolest humans. I hope I get to meet one day. I haven't met Alan yet, and you know, I hope to before anything happens because he's older, so you know. Now Stephen, I got to meet Stephen um, as a went to a it was a writers conference. I think it was like 2009. It was a celebration of Octavia Butler, I believe, and Stephen knew Octavia, and so it was really cool that he was able to make it. Him and Tanana. So I got to meet Stephen. I got to meet Tanana Reeve, and I got to meet Inedia Okorafor, who's another awesome, awesome writer. She's my current like favorite. Like there's nobody doing it better. And again, another awesome world builder. And I think all of her stories actually take place in the same world, just different times and different ways, but it's all the same world. But if you haven't checked out Nettie, check her out. And she's also a friend of Alan's. They've collaborated on the story, so it's not a surprise to me that I like her work. Um, Back to Stephen. Um, Stephen, um, you know, was into social media growing up. I mean, as social media was growing and it was growing, he was always involved. So he had a blog. So I used to follow his blog, and then, you know, he gravitated to Facebook and making posts there, and then, you know, he's doing other things outside of, you know, his writing. You know, because he's also a martial artist. He's a life coach, so he's doing stuff like that to help people. I have some of his programs, so awesome work. But I got to meet him at this writers conference, and I'll probably slide it in here. I took a picture with him and Tanana Reeve. But the coolest thing that happened, you know, me and him, we were talking. Like I said, I've been following his work. Arby Knight's one of my favorite characters in this three novels. Uh, so it's a series of books. And those books, like that character of Aubrey Knight and his journey, helped me out a lot throughout my life, even up until that point. You know, we were talking, and, you know, again, Stephen, black man, older than I, growing up in a generation before me, my father's generation, so, you know, serious stuff. And so he's very protective of, you know, his family and himself. And so, you know, he had asked me if I wanted to meet his son Jason. His son Jason was traveling with him at Sonata Reef, and like to this day, that's still one of the biggest joys I've ever got to experience. Because again, like I said, he's a serious guy and he's very protective. He's not gonna just let anyone meet his son. And even though I'm a stranger, even though we just met and we were talking, like for him to invite me to meet Jason was still just magical. And I know Steven, now that I have actually met him, and then through him being very open about the way he is in the world. He's very good at reading people. It's a skill that I think he has innately, and that he's also uh, purposely developed. And and he can read people very well from a physical and non-physical perspective. And so I like to believe that he saw the way in which I walk through the world and the goodness and the kindness that is the core of who I am. And knowing that is still just one of the greatest compliments anyone could have ever given me. You know, yeah, I'm still like just thinking about it. It's like that was amazing. From outside perspective, somebody let you meet this kid. You don't understand. Either you don't have kids, or I don't know. You don't feel as protective of your kids as people like me are. I don't. I have my daughter. I don't just let her. And I'm not gonna invite anyone to meet her. So, um, but yeah, that was a very cool experience. Um, but yeah, but yeah. So this was just I just wanted to do a video talking about my appreciation, my introduction to science fiction, as far as novels, and literature. Where is that? These are my two favorites, hands down, of all time. Alan Dean Foster, Glory Lane, Stephen Barnes, Street Lethal. Just phenomenal work. One's space stuff, one's contemporary future. Not contemporary, but it's like future Earth. And I don't even think it's that far in the future anymore. I forget what year it says this, but we're closer now to this future than this was when it was written. This is the original was '83. I got this edition in '91. So, and it takes place in 2000 something. It's not that far away now. It's funny how far ahead we thought we'd be in a society in a shorter amount of time. Shows you how hopeful some speculative fiction writers really were about this species, about our species. But yeah. But like my favorite, writers, Alan Dean Foster, Stephen Barnes. For fantasy, because Stephen is not like he doesn't do like science fiction, like space stuff. At least he hasn't yet, as far as I know. I have most of his books as well. A lot of his stuff is Earth based, contemporary science fiction, or 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 fantastical fiction in some form or fashion, or just just speculative, not necessarily science or fantasy, just speculative about the human condition, which is what it's all SF is really about. It's about us and how we engage with different scenarios of this world, of this universe. So, but my favorites, Alan, Stephen, Charles DeLint is my favorite fantasy author. I'll do another video talking about him and a few other people. But those are the three I've been reading the longest. Alan's first, Stephen's second, Charles DeLint is third. Like, that's my three. And then, of course, you have Octavia Butler, you have N.K. Jemisin, you have Nettie, who I mentioned already, Simon Green. Um, oh, oh, Richard K. Morgan is freaking retardedly awesome. He's one of the newer Well, he's not new anymore, but when he first came out, he came out swinging the sword like nobody was touching this dude, and he's been killing it ever since. Neil Stevenson, Snow Crash is still one of the best science fiction novels ever written. But anyway, I can go on, and I will on a different video. But just wanted to talk about my introduction to the world of speculative fiction, sci-fi, and fantasy. Uh, Check out Alan, check out Steven, and I'm gonna do a whole video series, I think, on both of them actually, because I love their works. But I'm gonna start with Alan because it's just so much. So thank you for coming to the Dragons Den. Young old man is out. Hagone. That's DNA for. See you later. Peace.